Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? Welcome to a little review of The Elder Scrolls Blades. So this is the new mobile game from Bethesda. It's just come out. It was announced last year at E3 and originally slated for release in the autumn. But it hit a few snags along the way, though Bethesda haven't been particularly clear on what those might actually be. But the game has been a bit longer in development than expected, and it's finally come out in early access this past weekend, so it's in time to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the Elder Scrolls series, which is pretty cool. One of the first things you're probably going to notice about this video is that the footage from the game doesn't have any audio. The major reason for that being that I'm playing it on my Android phone, and Android won't let me record any audio from it, which is extremely frustrating, but unfortunately, it is what it is. There is kind of a workaround it, but as I understand it, that would basically involve hacking my phone, which is a can of worms I don't fancy opening, to be honest with you. So I don't think we're going to go there. For the moment, we'll start by saying you can have to take my word for it that the audio is really quite nice. The music's as good as you would expect, even, from a Bethesda game on any platform, frankly, and the sound effects are where you would expect them in an Elder Scrolls game as well, so that's a good strong start. So when Blades was announced at E3 last year, they made a number of statements, and I've gone back over that announcement. You can have a look at the full video from E3 yourself. There's a link down in the description if you want to see that. And based on my first impressions, which is what a lot of this is, to be fair, it seems to meet up mostly with what they said it was going to be back then, albeit somewhat later than intended. Whether or not the game is as big as they were saying it was going to be, I don't entirely know. I've not had the opportunity to find out yet, but I haven't seen any sign of a limit to it yet, so that's cool. They did say back at E3 that you were going to be able to visit your friends' towns. As to whether or not you're going to be able to do that, I don't know. Can't seem to do it in early access, but then again, it could just be that I've not moved far enough along in the game yet. So, holding off on a judgment there. They've also said that they wanted to put it out on as many devices as possible, and for the early access period, that one they've not quite pulled out. The list of available devices is quite short. It covers most of the major devices available at the moment. So you've got your iPhones, most of the big Android names, iPad, that sort of thing. But as for the other things that we've been talking about, they've got long-term goals to put it on things like PlayStations and PCs and VR and all that stuff as well. That's way off in the future. But I suppose we probably shouldn't be surprised if it's coming out in early access that it's not quite finished yet. That's kind of the point. Get it tested before they put out the finalised version. On a related note to that, by the way, they have said they're going to continue developing the game well after launch as well, so more content will be coming off in the future, including certain elements that are locked at the moment, so lots more to see in future with this game as well, so that's going to be interesting to see how it progresses. Looking forward to finding out. The game is free to play, it's free to download, however, it does have microtransactions in it, and quite sizable ones. So I'm going to get into in a bit more detail later on, because there's quite a bit to be said about that, so bear with me and we'll get there on that one. So, a bit of an overview first. The game, obviously, as I say, it's a mobile game. It's set in the Elder Scrolls world. The exact position in the timeline I'm not sure on. It's not very clear at this stage. Whether or not that's deliberate or just something they haven't released or something we'll find out more as I play on, I don't know, but we'll find out. The idea is you play as a member of the Blades who left home to join the organisation, and following a treaty with the Elder Dominion, the Blades were disbanded, and you return home to find your hometown has, not so long ago, been destroyed. It's basically a smoking ruin, and the survivors have fled off in all different directions and gotten themselves into huge amounts of trouble, as they always seem to do in RPGs. And you take charge of the rebuilding, basically becoming the town's new mayor, sort of by proxy, I suppose. And from there on, you head out to complete quests and adventures to gain materials and money to rebuild your home, and basically explore what happened. There does seem to be a main story to it. Exactly where that's going, I don't know yet. I've not had enough time with the game. which is another subject we'll be touching back on in a little while. The game has 3 main modes. You've got the arena, which is currently locked off. That's going to be the PvP mode. It's basically going to be, I think, a one-on-one player versus player environment where you can test your combat skills. How that's actually going to pan out, we don't know yet, as I say, because it's still closed off for the early access period, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. The second mode is called the Abyss, which is quite literally an endless dungeon. You load into it and it drops you in on level 1, and you progress through level after level, encountering progressively more dangerous enemies, and basically have to fight your way through what is essentially a long series of, I believe, procedurally generated halls, collecting loot and defeating enemies along the way, and as you progress you earn new rewards in the form of crafting materials, chests, sort of loot chests, that sort of thing, as you move on through. I believe you do have to start over each time you jump in as well, because when you sign out and return to the rest of the game, it does inform you that your progress in the Abyss will not be saved and you have to start again. So it's sort of a long run thing if you've got a longer period of time to play the game, but an interesting idea. And the third area is town mode, which is the main part of the game. Features a town, which is your hometown, which is the main hub. It's where you get all your quests and start out on your adventures from. And it also features a rebuilding, I suppose, mechanic, wherein the main town has a lot of destroyed buildings that you can select and rebuild them into within the realms of the list of available options, whatever you like. You put houses where you like, you build a blacksmith, you can build an enchanter's workshop, and so on and so forth. You work through this, find out what happened, find out a bit more about the history, and build up your character, who is of course customizable, and progress on through the game in that fashion. The character creation, as you can probably imagine with it being a mobile game, is a little simplified compared to what you might have seen in, say, Skyrim, for example. Obviously, it's running on your mobile, not a PC or a console. It's not going to be as vast and open world as, say, Skyrim was, but as a mobile game set in the Elder Scrolls universe, it works. It's pretty good. Certainly been enjoying playing it. One of the biggest differences you will note is that, as with previous Elder Scrolls games, the different races have different unique bonuses and abilities. Those are in many ways dialed back and modified in Blades, specifically because I think of the platform it's running on and the changes they had to make to the gameplay in order to make it function on a touchscreen, in short. So the changed bonuses reflect that. So as you encounter characters around the town, they'll send you out on new quests, as I say, to pick up different materials and to level up your character. And most of these quests take place in what essentially are dungeons. Some of them are traditional inside type dungeons, caves and castles, ruined forts, that sort of thing. And some of them are outside areas, sort of wandering through the forests. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage of that just at the moment. I've only run into the 2 missions so far that had that particular setup, and that was before I actually decided to go ahead and make this particular video. Yeah, they function much like internal dungeons in a sense. They basically have corridors. So it's obviously it's a forest, so it's paths, but basically the structure is much the same as another dungeon. Again, a limitation, I think, of being on a mobile platform rather than on a much larger, more game-oriented platform, but it does work. As you explore and get into battles and so on and so forth, it's fun. Combat basically has you standing still, which is a little unfortunate. I'd like to see it get more dynamic, I think. The basic structure of it is that the enemy attacks you, you both become more or less locked in place, and then it's a case of timing your attacks and your blocks and your spells in order to defeat your opponent. Critical hits are also in the game. It has to do with how exactly you time your attacks. It is visually represented on screen, but not immediately obvious, which kind of works because they shouldn't be too easy to pull off, so that's quite cool. Controls overall reasonably intuitive. If you've been playing Skyrim in particular on a console, you'll find them relatively familiar. However, they could be a little bit more responsive. The main technique for attacking is to hold and release, and it's not quite as responsive as I'd like to see it being. But then again, game's in early access. Hopefully Bethesda can fine-tune that process a little bit. Movement in general is either with virtual joysticks, so the movement of your thumbs as they're pressed on the screen, or you can go more like either VR or an older, sort of old school top-down style of movement, in that you can point and click where you want to go and the character just runs off in that direction. That's particularly reflected if you happen to play the game in portrait mode, because swinging it around into portrait mode, the game does work. You can do everything in portrait mode that you can do in landscape. Personally, I think I favour landscape a little bit more. I just prefer that wider field of view, it feels a bit more natural. But if you want to play the game one-handed, portrait mode will actually allow you to do that. Everything's a lot more reachable, it's designed to be played in that manner, so that's pretty cool that you've got that option, I like that. And Bethesda said from day one that's something they wanted to pull off, and to be fair to them, they have. I think they've done that quite well. The menu system is, as you can imagine for any RPG, a little heavy. There's quite a bit in there, but it's not over the top for an RPG style of game. And it's not as sort of obtuse as the menus were in Skyrim, I suppose, so that's a definite improvement, and something again reflecting, I think, the new platform that it's on. So as sort of a general overview, I'd say that the game definitely looks and feels like an Elder Scrolls game. Bethesda did say they set out to create a game that had console quality graphics running on a phone, which is fairly ambitious, to be fair, but for the most part I think they've pulled it off. The game does look very pretty. Whether or not it's console quality, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'll go quite that far yet, but it is very, very nice. So what they've achieved is certainly noteworthy at the very least. As somebody who doesn't play a great deal of mobile games in general, I can't really compare it in much to other games, sort of beyond having peeked over friends' shoulders at what they're playing, really. But it definitely holds up, I think, based on what I've seen. One of the big limitations of playing it on a mobile, and particularly on touchscreen, however, is that certain key mechanics from the PC and console versions of the game just plain don't work on a touchscreen. One of the most obvious of those being archery. No stealth archers in this game. In fact, no stealth at all, as far as I can tell. So it's basically magic or melee is the way you can go. Unfortunately, trying to hold, aim and draw a bow on a touchscreen would be kind of a nightmare. You'd have to put the phone down every single time you wanted to take a shot, which would be less than ideal, I think. So they've foregone that particular style of play. It's a little sad, but I can understand why they've done it. One of the other big things that I took away from it is the game does feel like a mobile game, as I said, and one of the ways in which it does that is it feels more geared towards shorter play sessions. So if you're talking, you know, your lunch break from work or school perhaps, or, you know, a longer than average bathroom break, something like that, then it fits in quite nicely. But if you're just sitting playing it for the sake of playing a game, then you start to run into things that sort of feel like time barriers, I suppose. Specifically, timers, and it's a result of the way they've decided to monetize the game. So, this is one of those areas that gamers love to hate, shall we say, and often with good reason, and sometimes games get it right, sometimes they get it horribly wrong. Bethesda are walking an interesting line this time. Back when they did Fallout Shelter, because they didn't, well, partly because they didn't have a beta period or an early access period and just went straight from announcement to the game is live now, they had to be very careful with how they handled the monetization. They didn't have the option to tweak it and test it in early access. This time around they do, and it's just as well really, because whereas with Fallout Shelter they went much more light touch, with the Elder Scrolls Blades they have not really done that so much. They've gone with what I understand to be a more traditional approach to the way mobile games monetize themselves, particularly the ones that are free to play. Particularly when you contrast it to Fallout Shelter, that really does stand out, and fortunately it is in early access because it does feel rather heavy-handed at the moment. Blades takes two particular approaches to its monetization. The first one is that it uses timers, which, if you're playing in short sessions, aren't really too horrific, but I think as you push on through the game and build up more of a collection of items and stuff like that, then you start to run into them a little bit more, and you start doing more, you start encountering the timers more often. So the main areas that you will encounter them is when you're building in your town, you choose a building to place, assuming you've got the materials and the money to build it, select the build, and it takes an amount of time to build, depending on what you're building. You know, the smallest type of house takes a couple of minutes. The largest types of artisans, or presumably the city walls as well, will take much, much longer. Same is true of crafting. Small, quick and easy items don't take very long to craft. Bigger ones, you have to wait a bit longer. To be fair, I crafted an iron chest plate. I think that's the only thing I've actually crafted so far. Maybe a set of gauntlets as well. But those were around about 30 seconds or less to craft, so that wasn't too bad. But some of the other ones are considerably longer. So that's where you start running into it being a bit of an issue, and I think Bethesda could certainly do with dialing that back. But, as I say, early access, that's kind of the point. The third area that you'll run into the timers is opening loot chests. So, as the staple is with RPGs and dungeon crawlers, that sort of thing, which Blade certainly falls into that category, as you explore your dungeons, you find chests, and as you would have done in Skyrim, for example, open up those chests and get a random roll for whatever loot the chest may contain. Same thing basically happens in Blades, except that you kind of pick the chest up, take it with you, and you run into a timer for how long it takes to open. Now, the most basic ones that you pick up in the early levels take about 30 seconds to unlock, so that's not really a problem. However, when you get to the higher tier ones, those take a lot longer. You'll very quickly start seeing silver chests are called, and those have a 3-hour timer as it currently stands, which you can skip through the use of paid currency. And this is where it starts to get a bit iffy. So you don't have to, by any stretch of the imagination. If you feel like putting it aside and moving on doing something else, that's fine, do that. That's basically what I'm doing. If you don't particularly want to wait, you have the option to pay for it. But 3 hours seems excessive, especially given we're not talking about top tier items here. So I hate to imagine how long some of those top tier items might actually be. It would feel overkill to me. I should say that I don't really have anything really to compare it to regarding other mobile games. I don't know what they're like. I don't know what their timers are like when they use them. So I would imagine it's vaguely similar. Bethesda's Montreal studio originally started out as an external studio developing mobile games, so they've got experience in that area, so I would imagine it's not that far wide of the mark, but it does come as a little jarring, particularly once you get stuck into the game properly. The other side to that, of course, being that you can only open one chest at a time, which when you're talking about short few second timers is fine. When you're talking about something that takes several hours, it slows down your progress quite a lot. I mean, this is how they monetize it, but there's definitely room for a balance pass there. If Fallout Shelter was able to do it as well as it did, and it did incredibly well, with such a light touch on its monetization, Blades could do with taking a significantly larger leaf out of that book, I think. Obviously, loot chests come in various grades, and the higher level of the loot chest, the better the loot in it, the longer the timer. The pay currency that you use to open the chests quicker, or speed the timers on by, of any kind, is called gems, and obviously, as I say, you can buy it with real world money. The game does provide you with some of these, as is fairly standard, but it's a very small number compared to the cost of most things. If you start skipping timers, it's going to disappear very, very quickly. Although on the flip side, to be fair, if you leave the timer to run for a while and then come back and want to speed it up halfway through, you no longer have to pay the full price. The cost drops along with the timer, so that's something at least, I suppose. But yeah. Not an aspect of the game that I'm particularly keen on, but it is one you can bypass, so at the cost of a little bit of patience anyway. One other area that I have just started to run into a little bit now, having about 4 hours into the game, I suppose. It's admittedly not a vast amount, is that there is a limit to the amount of space you have in your inventory, and there is a limit to the number of unopened chests you can carry around. And the only way to expand that limit is through using the paid currency, which, as I say, you can get through playing the game, but it takes a lot longer, and if you start spending it, it's going to disappear very quickly, and you're ultimately just going to end up butting into this wall of waiting for the chests to be opened in order to then be able to progress and pick more up. You can actually continue playing, even with your inventory full, obviously, as you would be able to in something like Skyrim, but it will then prevent you from picking up the loot chests and getting better loot. Short of just straight up quest rewards anyway, which is... I would like to see that particular choice thrown out, to be honest. I don't think it's such a bad thing to have a limit to your inventory size. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to limit the number of chests you can carry around. But making the only way to expand that limit through paying for it, I think was definitely far too heavy-handed, shall we say. I would like to see them go down the route of making it something you can craft. If it's expensive, I would understand that, or at least giving you the option to craft it in addition to paying for it. So yeah, maybe make it reasonably expensive to craft, but at least have that option in there, I think would be a better choice. The other side of how they've monetized is also somewhat on that line that gamers don't like, with good reason. And that's through the store. Now, primarily, you can buy cosmetics for the town. That's just various display items, things like flags or various other things that you can just place around, statues, that sort of thing. You can also get unique item packs, which contain weapons and armour. Now, I don't know one way or the other as to whether or not these are comparable to things you can pick up in the game or not. If they are more powerful than most things you pick up in the game, or you can't equal them through normal gameplay, then that's dangerously close to pay to win. On the other hand, I would also expect Bethesda to know that and avoid that. So maybe you won't get quite so fancy versions if you're getting them through earning them in-game, but for the most part, it'll be more of a thing on the PvP side, I think, than on the PvE side. The main gameplay feels like it's not going to have any issues as far as progression goes, regarding if you're not buying things from the store, you're not going to be able to progress. On the other hand, if these items are particularly powerful when you jump into the arena, unless there's a decent matchmaking system anyway, you're going to find that players who have deeper pockets end up winning far more battles, which would be unfortunate. I would very much hope that's not going to be the case, but unfortunately we won't find out unless Bethesda comes out and actually says something, or when the game actually goes into full release and the arena is released itself. So it's something I will probably follow up on that one in future. The other thing you can buy in the store, apart from obviously more gems with which to speed timers by, is loot boxes. So they're basically the same sort of thing you find in the game, but obviously they're higher level and they cost real world money. So this is always a touchy subject, and to be honest, I think Bethesda would probably have been wiser to steer well clear. So long as you can get the items in-game, then hopefully they haven't messed it up too much, but it's definitely going to take a lot longer if you try and do them through just regular gameplay, which it always kind of sucks a bit. On the other hand, to be fair to Bethesda, they're putting the game out for free, and they didn't get to develop it for free, so they need to make the money somewhere. One good thing about the loot boxes is they have a little information button next to each of them, and whilst it doesn't tell you what you might get out of the box, it tells you the chances of getting an item of a particular quality. So you've got like exceptional, rare, etc, 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 and it'll give you a percentage chance of getting an item of that quality. Some of them are guaranteed. Some of them further down the list, because you get several items in each box, are random rolls. I have mixed feelings on that, but at least they're being, RNG notwithstanding, reasonably open about your chances of winning things. Adding a guaranteed drop of something that it should be worth having is probably a good move, I think. That certainly softens the blow a little bit, in my opinion. As I say, I really very much hope that these items are equally earnable through just regular gameplay, otherwise the pay-to-win thing is a trap I would seriously hope Bethesda wouldn't fall into. But they have made a few, should we say, missteps in recent months, so I'm not quite as optimistic as I'd like to be. I'm not going to give up hope, though. So, yeah, harking back to what I was saying before as well, yeah, it particularly stands out in comparison to the way they approached Fallout Shelter with a very light touch to monetization. They've gone pretty much the other direction here. But as one of the developers on Fallout Shelter did say, and I would assume he's also one of the developers for Blades as well, as it's the same group of people making this, one of the significant points of having an early access period is to figure out where the right line is for monetization. There's apparently an industry standard for the development of mobile games, and Fallout Shelter, with its light touch and instant launch and no early access period, is actually something of an anomaly. So hopefully, with their experience, background and knowledge of that, they will bear this in mind and make the necessary changes and dial it back, because I think the game would seriously benefit from that. So, Sort of wrapping up my thoughts overall then, Blades is a lot of fun to play. It very much feels like an Elder Scrolls game, although one designed for mobile. Different to its predecessors, as you'd expect with a touchscreen type of interface, but definitely it's got all the characteristics you'd expect to find in an Elder Scrolls game, albeit in a much lighter version. It fits very, very well into sort of short packets of time, breaks, that sort of thing, and plays well in that regard, and I've been very much enjoying it. It's very, very pretty, every bit as pretty as they were aiming to achieve. It looks absolutely fantastic, in fact. And I have, as I say, been enjoying it. If it wasn't in particular for the timer mechanics, I would be inclined to play a lot more of it, as it's really quite hooking me. I suppose that's the general idea, though. You know, that's how they get the monetization to actually work, but there we go. Speaking of, monetization definitely too heavy-handed. It needs dialing back. I would like to see the controls being a bit more responsive as well. That's a little fine-tuning thing they can do over time. It's not a massive problem. It should be definitely a doable fix. One thing that they haven't added that kind of surprises me in a Bethesda game, and I would certainly like to see, particularly in light of the fact that they did manage to include a similar sort of principle in Fallout Shelter, is that as it stands, you cannot have more than one character. You can redesign your character at any stage, but you can't respec as it stands. But to not be able to have multiple characters at all with different specializations and different goals is very, very surprising. I think it's probably because as you progress through the game, you'll ultimately be able to, assuming you play for long enough, unlock every skill, every spell, etc., with the one character, and then you just pick and choose the ones you want, and pick the gear you want, and away you go. So, in a sense, you won't need them, but it does surprise me a little bit, to be honest. As I say, Bethesda have said in their FAQ, which I will link below as well, that they are adding more features up until launch and after launch as well, so there's a possibility that they'll expand on that idea in future. I'm going to put the links to the FAQ and to the E3 announcement from last summer down in the description, so if you want to have a look at that and try it out, you can. The game is free to play. Just head on over to Bethesda.net and sign in with your usual Bethesda.net account, and you can register for early access there. They'll send you an email when it's cleared through, and you just download the game and away you go. So you can give it a go for free if you like. I am enjoying it. I'm going to keep playing it, and we'll just have to see how the monetization thing actually pans out and whether or not it becomes kind of a burden on enjoyment of the game. But it's a bit. It's the big area they need to address, I think. But of course, it's not going to go away entirely, and in all fairness, probably shouldn't either, really. But there we go. I do hope that's interesting and informative to you. Do check out the links down below, and as I say, I'll link over to Bethesda.net as well if you do want to try the game out. It's certainly free to try, if nothing else, and worth a look. And in the meantime, I think I'm going to jump back in and have a bit more fun with it, because I am actually quite enjoying this game, which is actually kind of new for me in mobile games. For now, thank you very much for watching. Do hope you enjoyed. If you did, do hit those buttons for me. As always, social media links down in the description. I will be speaking to you all very, very soon.